The leaky cauldron carried the thick scent of old timber and fried breakfasts, with something sharper beneath it, an almost electric prickle that lived just under the skin, like the breath of air before a storm breaks. Albus Potter edged closer to his father as they threaded through the crowd. Witches in travel-worn cloaks, wizards hunched over the morning Daily Prophet, mugs clinking, plates scraping, laughter and argument folding together into one steady roar. Ginny's hand settled lightly on his shoulder, warm, steady, familiar. "Nervous?" she asked, amusement tucked into her voice. Albus nodded, because speaking felt impossible. His throat had tightened sometime between Grimmauld Place and here, and it hadn't loosened since. In his pocket, his school list was crumpled from being unfolded and refolded so many times it felt like it had been worried into existence. Around them, he wasn't the only one. Families filled the pub, children clutching parchment, parents exchanging the same knowing looks, the air heavy with anticipation and the ghosts of other first mornings. Near the back, Hermione Granger Weasley stood with Rose, who was already scribbling notes on her supply list, like the parchment might test her later. Ron hovered beside them, one hand anchored on Hugo's shoulder, the other wrapped around what looked suspiciously like his third cup of tea. Rose's hair, so like her mother's, was pulled into a sensible braid, and her eyes ran down the list with fierce concentration. "Mum," Rose said, earnest and intense. "It says we need the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, but I read there's a supplementary edition with extra chapters on advanced wand work, and—"
"Let's get the required books first," Hermione said gently.
Though pride shone unmistakably in her face, bright as a candle behind glass. Across the room, slightly separated from the morning rush, Draco Malfoy adjusted his son's collar for what had to be the third time. Scorpius Malfoy, pale hair, grey eyes, his features a softer echo of Draco's, stood very still, gaze fixed on the bustling families. His expression was carefully blank, but his fingers worried the edge of his robe as if it might unravel. "Stop fidgeting," Draco murmured, but his hand lingered on Scorpius's shoulder, protective more than scolding. Astoria Malfoy touched Draco's arm, a quiet, calming gesture. "He's allowed to be nervous," she said. "It's a big day." The words hung between them, weighted with everything they didn't say. How different this was from Draco's own childhood trip. How the world had shifted since then. How fiercely they wanted Scorpius's experience to be gentler than theirs. Harry's gaze caught Draco's from across the pub. For a heartbeat, they simply looked at each other. No longer enemies, not quite friends, but both men bound by something new, fatherhood, and the vulnerability of watching a child step toward a world that could be dazzling and cruel in the same breath. Draco gave a small nod. Harry returned it. "Right then," Harry said, cutting through the swirl in Albus's head. "Ready?" Albus looked up at him and didn't see a legend, not really. He saw the fine creases at the corners of Harry's eyes, a few threads of grey in his black hair, a small scar above one eyebrow from some long-ago Quidditch mishap. He saw Dad, the one who made dreadful pancakes, told worse jokes, and still sometimes woke from nightmares he pretended didn't exist. "What if—" Albus began. Harry squeezed his shoulder. "The alley's been there for centuries," he said calmly. "It'll still be there in 5 minutes." Then, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret, "I was terrified my first time, too. Hagrid practically dragged me through." Albus blinked. "Really? Really?" Harry smiled, and it transformed his face, made him look younger, lighter. "Come on, let's not keep magic waiting." They moved toward the back together, the Potters, the Weasleys, and yes, the Malfoys as well, keeping a careful distance, but moving in the same direction. Tom the innkeeper, ancient and gap-toothed, gave Harry a nod as they passed, the same nod he'd once given a frightened boy decades ago. The courtyard behind the pub looked like nothing. High walls, cracked cobbles, a rubbish bin, weeds forcing their way up through stone. To a muggle, it would have been a dead end. A forgotten corner, a place for broken bottles and careless footsteps. But Albus could feel it now. That charged edge in the air, growing stronger, more insistent. Magic pressed against the plainness like a heartbeat behind ribs, waiting to be acknowledged. Harry drew his wand, and Albus's breath caught. He'd watched his father do magic 1,000 times, repairing toys, lighting fires, conjuring flowers for Ginny. But this was different. This was ritual. This was a threshold. 3 up, Harry murmured, as though counting for himself. 2 across. He touched the wall with the wand tip. For a suspended moment, nothing happened. The world held still, as if waiting to see whether it would be allowed to change. Then the brick quivered. It rippled like water disturbed by a dropped stone, the movement spreading outward in slow rings. Bricks began to slide aside, grinding softly, rearranging themselves with a sound that was somehow both mechanical and alive. They folded back, making an arch, and beyond it, light, warm, golden sunlight spilled through onto the courtyard stones. Impossible and inviting. A street opened where no street could exist. Albus gasped. He couldn't stop it. The sound slipped out with the breath he'd been holding, pure and startled wonder. Beside him, Rose made a similar sound, smaller but equally stunned. And just beyond her, Scorpius drew in a quiet breath, as though he'd been waiting his whole life for permission to believe. Diagon Alley. The name had lived in bedtime stories and casual family reminiscing, described until it had become almost mythical in Albus's head. But nothing, no story, no explanation, no imagining, prepared him for the reality. The street stretched ahead, narrow and winding, disappearing around corners that promised more secrets. Buildings leaned at impossible angles, upper floors jutting out to steal sunlight and cast patchwork shadows on the cobbles. Shop windows glittered with displays that defied logic, books that appeared to turn their own pages, cauldrons that puffed rainbow smoke, owls watching passers-by with unsettling intelligence. Even the air felt different, thicker, textured with magic and possibility. And the smells, parchment and potion ingredients, old stone and warm bread drifting from a bakery, owl feathers, the metallic tang that clung to spellwork. Under it all, that sharp scent, like ozone, like lightning about to strike, the smell of concentrated ancient magic. People flowed down the street in robes of every color, emerald, midnight blue, deep purple, scarlet. Witches carried shopping bags that bobbed along behind them, as if they were obedient pets. Wizards stood arguing in tight clusters about Quidditch scores and ministry policy. Children darted between legs, shrieking with laughter as they raced toward the distant pale shape of Gringotts. "Oh," Rose breathed, her usual composure cracking. "Oh, Mum, look at everything." Hermione laughed, but her eyes shone. "I know, sweetheart."
I remember.
Ron slipped his hand into hers. They stood still for a beat. Two people who'd once walked these stones when the world was darker and the future felt sharp-edged. But they had survived. They'd made it through. And now they were giving this wonder, this impossible, bright beginning, to their children. Scorpius stood very still beside Astoria, grey eyes reflecting the spill of sunlight until they looked almost silver. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He stared as if Diagon Alley might vanish if he blinked. Hunger and fear and desperate hope all braided together on his face. Astoria laced their fingers together. "It's real," she whispered. "All of it. And you belong here as much as anyone." Something in Scorpius shifted. His shoulders dropped a fraction, tension loosening, though his eyes stayed locked on the street. Ginny stepped forward first, easy and confident. She had grown up with magic. Diagon Alley was as natural to her as breath. Still, she paused at the threshold and looked back at Albus, smiling in a way that felt like summer. "Come on then," she said. "The alley's waited long enough." Bah. Harry took Albus's hand. Albus felt the squeeze, warm, grounding, and something strange tugged at him. The sudden thought that his father's hand had once held his hand like this. That time moved faster than anyone deserved. Together they stepped through. It was subtle but unmistakable, like passing through a curtain of warm water. The world changed in an instant. The noise of Muggle London, cars, sirens, the distant underground rumble, cut off as if a door had closed. In its place came the soundscape of magical commerce, the clink of coins, the hoot of owls, snatches of conversation about potion marks and transfiguration essays. A street performer charmed roses to bloom and wither in endless loops, drawing delighted applause. Albus's shoes met the cobbles and something inside him clicked into place, like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known existed. This was real. Not just in stories, not just in the everyday evidence at home, his father's wand, his mother's broom, Uncle Ron's enchanted gadgets. Here it was tangible, a whole world running beside the ordinary one, hidden but never gone. He looked up at Harry and found an expression he couldn't name, part nostalgia, part pride, and part something darker, grief, maybe. Not for the day, but for innocence. For the way magic always came braided with danger and consequence. Harry knew that better than most. "You all right?" Harry asked quietly. Albus nodded, then shook his head, then nodded again. It's just, I know." Harry squeezed his hand. "The first time's the hardest. After that, it gets easier. Not less magical, just easier to believe." Rose had already yanked out her list again, determination snapping back into place. "If we go to Gringotts first," she began, "and then work back towards the leaky cauldron, we can maximize efficiency and—" "Rose," Ron cut in gently, "maybe we wander a bit first? Take it in." Hermione gave him a grateful look. She loved planning too, but she remembered what it felt like to be 11 and new, when every window was a revelation and efficiency was the enemy of wonder. They began to move, and as they did, the big group naturally broke into smaller ones. The Potters drew close together, the Weasleys clustered around Rose, the Malfoys maintained their careful space. But they were all here, walking the same stones carried by the same current. Families who'd survived a world that had once been torn apart and had insisted on rebuilding it. Albus walked near Harry, eyes darting from shop to shop, trying to drink in everything before it vanished. A witch hurried past with a cage of purple toads. A wizard argued with a shopkeeper about dragon-hide gloves. A cat, or something pretending to be a cat, watched from a windowsill with eyes far too knowing. Rose paused, staring at a display of self-stirring cauldrons, caught between delight and academic awe. And beyond her, Scorpius, walking in and out of lamplight with his parents, let a small, genuine smile slip free. The alley hummed around them, buying and selling, gossip and greeting, the everyday magic of community. Yet beneath it, Albus sensed something else, An awareness, like the stones themselves were watching, as if Diagon Alley recognized that something had shifted. A new generation had arrived. Ginny glanced at Hermione. In that look lived years of history. Battles fought, friends lost, a world saved in small acts of courage. Then they looked at their children, and their faces softened into hope. "Where her?" Harry asked, voice steady, though Albus heard the faint catch beneath it. "Books," Rose said instantly. "Robes," Ginny suggested. "One." Scorpius whispered so softly that only Astoria caught it, though she smiled as if she'd heard it perfectly. "All of it," Hermione said, laughing. "One step at a time, just like we did." They turned a gentle corner, and Flourish and Blotts rose ahead, its great bow window shining like a promise. While, behind the spotless glass, books moved as if they had their own choreography, floating, stacking, forming towers that collapsed and rebuilt themselves into new shapes. The display was hypnotic, knowledge made visible, restless and alive. "There!" Rose breathed, longing thick in her voice. Hermione's smile was soft. "I thought you might want this first." The sign above the door was picked out in faded gold, and beneath it, in smaller lettering, established 1654. Nearly 400 years. 400 years of children standing exactly where Albus stood now, feeling exactly this mixture of excitement and nerves. Ron opened the door, and a bell chimed, a chord rather than a single note, as if the sound adjusted itself to the person entering. For Rose, it sounded bright and curious. For Albus, it was softer, tentative. He couldn't explain how he knew, he just did. The smell hit him immediately. Old paper, leather bindings, ink and dust, and possibility. The shop stretched far deeper than the narrow front suggested. Rows of shelves disappeared into a pleasant dimness, lit by floating candles that cast warm pools of light. Books crowded every surface, floor to ceiling, stacked on tables, balanced in towers that somehow never fell. Some were enormous, the kind you'd need two hands to lift. Others were slim volumes that glowed faintly, as if the magic inside them was impatient. And they moved. Not all of them, but enough that the whole shop felt alive. A book on advanced transfiguration theory drifted past Albus's ear like it had somewhere important to be. Another rose from a display table and slid itself onto a higher shelf, clearly displeased with where it had been placed. "Merlin's beard," Rose whispered, reverence in her voice like she'd stepped into a cathedral. Behind the counter, a witch looked up from an enormous ledger she was annotating. She wore reading glasses and ink-stained cuffs, hair pulled back in a practical bun, and she had the slightly distracted expression of someone who lived more among books than people. "First years?" she asked, and her smile was warm. "You've got the look." "Welcome to Flourish and Blotts." "We need the standard first-year texts," Hermione said, already producing Rose's list, "and perhaps a few supplementary volumes if you have recommendations." The witch's eyes brightened with the joy of someone who loved recommending books. "Names?" "Rose Granger Weasley," Hermione said. Recognition flickered across the witch's face. "Granger... not..." Hermione's cheeks colored slightly. "Yes." Rose lifted her chin, pride radiating. "Mum's work is in books now." The witch's smile softened. "Your mother's work has been in books for a long time, dear." Then, brisk and efficient, she raised her wand. "Rose Granger Weasley. Hogwarts. First year." For a beat, nothing happened. Then the books began to come. They moved from different corners of the shop, gliding through the air with intent. The Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, floated down from a high shelf. A history of magic drifted from the history section, its spine new and uncracked compared to the battered copies older generations had owned. Magical Theory, a beginner's guide to transfiguration, 1,000 magical herbs and fungi. Each book joined the growing pile at the counter, stacking itself neatly as if it had practiced. Rose stared, mouth slightly open. "They know," she whispered. "They know who needs them." "This shop's been here a long time," the witch said, wrapping the books in brown paper with quick, practiced motions. "It gets a feel for these things. Books like to find the right students." Harry stepped forward. "Potter. Albus Potter." The witch's eyes widened a fraction. Of course she knew the name. Still, she simply nodded and lifted her wand again without fuss. Albus's books began their own quiet journey toward him, and as he watched them arrive, something fluttered in his chest, a mix of excitement and the sudden weight of responsibility. These weren't just purchases. These would be his textbooks, his first steps into learning magic properly. Near the back, Scorpius stood between his parents, fingers trailing along the spines in the potions section. Draco watched him with an expression Albus couldn't quite pass. Pride, yes, but also something like regret, or the heavy awareness of how much he wanted his son's path to differ from his own. "May I look around?" Scorpius asked quietly. Astoria glanced at Draco. Draco hesitated, then nodded. "Stay where we can see you." Scorpius moved deeper into the shop, drawn by instinct toward older shelves, where dust motes danced in candlelight, and books seemed to whisper to each other in languages older than English. Rose, meanwhile, had fully surrendered to obsession. With her required texts secured, she began prowling the shelves like a small, determined scholar on campaign. "Advanced Rune Translation," she read aloud. "Is that too advanced for first year?" "What about the philosophy of the mundane? Magic in everyday objects. Oh, Mum, look. A compendium of common curses and their counteractions." "Rose," Ron said fondly. "You haven't even learned basic spells yet." "But these are all connected," Rose insisted, clutching extra books to her chest. "If I understand the theoretical framework, then the practical applications will make more sense. It's logical." Hermione caught Ginny's eye. They shared a smile, recognition, amusement, the knowledge that some traits were stronger than eye color. Albus drifted toward a section labeled Recent History, the war years and after. The books here looked newer, but they felt heavier, as if the air around them remembered. Titles stared back like opened wounds. The Battle of Hogwarts, a survivor's account. Rebuilding the Wizarding World, 1998 to 2005. The Dark Lord, an objective analysis. And there prominently displayed, Hogwarts, a history, new edition, with additional chapters by Hermione Granger. Albus pulled it down carefully. The cover was deep burgundy, with gold lettering. He opened to the foreword and saw Hermione's name printed in neat, elegant script. Beneath it were words written in a voice he recognized from family dinners and late-night conversations. For those who fought, for those who fell, and for those who would carry magic forward into something better. "Heavy reading for a first year," a voice remarked beside him. Albus jumped slightly and looked up. A portrait hung on the wall. An elderly wizard with flowing white hair and half-moon spectacles, holding a book Albus couldn't quite make out. My aunt wrote part of it," Albus said, suddenly shy. "I wanted to see." The portrait nodded approvingly. "Hermione Granger's work is excellent, thoroughly researched, properly cited. Passion and precision, a rare combination." The wizard leaned forward slightly. "You have her eyes, you know. Weasley shape." but Granger intensity. I'm a Potter, Albus corrected, reflexive. The portrait went still. When it spoke again, the voice was gentler. Then you carry a different legacy, no less important. It gestured toward the book in Albus's hands. That will tell you what happened. It won't tell you how it felt. The fear, the courage, the small kindnesses that mattered more than any spell. Those stories live in the people who were there. Albus glanced across the shop. Harry stood with Ginny, their heads bent as Harry helped her choose a Quidditch tactics book for James. In this moment, Harry looked ordinary. Just another parent in a bookshop. But the books in this section knew differently. They carried his story inside their pages, sealed in ink and memory. It's a lot, Albus admitted quietly. Yes, the portrait said, but you are not your father, and Hogwarts is not at war. You will write your own story, young Potter. That is the gift your parents' generation fought for, the freedom to choose who you become. Before Albus could answer, Rose appeared at his elbow, arms piled with books. There you are. Did you see they have magical ethics in the post-war era? Professor Clearwater from the Ministry wrote it, and Mum says she's brilliant. It's about how magical law had to change after Voldemort. Rose stopped mid-sentence, the name still heavy even now. Albus stared at the cover. Balanced scales, light and shadow held in uneasy symmetry. Something about it tugged at him. The idea that magic wasn't just cleverness and power, but consequence, responsibility, choice. Would it be all right if I got that one too? He asked. Rose's face lit up. Yes, then we can discuss it during term. Compare notes. She straightened importantly. Mum says that's how you really learn, through discourse and debate. From the counter, the shop witch wrapped Albus's textbooks with quick efficiency. The parcels felt heavier when he took them, as if the weight wasn't just paper and binding, but the promise of everything he didn't know yet. Across the shop, Scorpius stood in a shaft of slanting light, holding a slim green volume. The Language of Plants, Magical Herbology Through the Ages. His eyes moved quickly across the pages, absorbing more than Albus expected. Draco approached, eyebrow raised. Herbology? I didn't know I cared, Scorpius admitted. But it's fascinating. He hesitated, then added, voice earnest. Did you know Dittany doesn't heal by forcing the wound closed? It persuades the body that it was never injured. It's not the plant that's magical. It's the conversation between the plant and the wizard. A genuine smile touched Draco's face, surprised into being. No, he said softly. I didn't know that. Shall we add it to your collection? Scorpius nodded, cradling the book like proof of something. Proof he might be allowed to become his own person, not just a name walking after history. As purchases finished and parcels were tucked into bags, Flourish and Blotts seemed to settle with satisfaction, like a cat pleased with how it had arranged a room. Sunlight angled through the windows, illuminating floating dust and the faint shimmer of preservation charms that protected older books from time. Rose clutched her parcels like treasure and talked about what she'd read first on the Hogwarts Express. Albus felt the quiet weight of magical ethics in his bag, a different sort of heaviness, thoughtful, grounding. Scorpius stepped out between his parents with herbology tucked close, his posture a fraction lighter. Outside Diagon Alley continued its steady pulse, shutters opening and closing, owls gliding overhead, families drifting from shop to shop. Hermione unfolded her list again, expression bright with practical purpose. Robes next, she declared. Then Ollivanders. Ron groaned theatrically. No more books, Hermione. Rose has enough to start her own shop. Hermione's smile was fond. Robes, she repeated. Then, wands. They started down the street together again, three families not quite merged, not quite separate either, moving toward the cheerful corner where Madame Malkin's sign swung gently above the cobbles, promising that the next threshold was waiting. Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions sat at the edge of a small widening in the cobbled street, the kind of spot that caught light even when the buildings leaned in close. The shop front looked freshly cared for. Cream paint with rich purple trim, the letters above the door looping in elegant script. In the windows, enchanted mannequins rotated slowly, showing robes as if they were living things, hems that fell just so, sleeves that floated with a graceful weight, fabric that seemed to catch candlelight, even in daylight. One mannequin in Ravenclaw dress robes offered a tiny, courtly bow as they approached, and Rose laughed, despite herself, surprised into childhood for a second. Much brighter than I remember, Hermione murmured, her gaze sweeping the cheerful storefront. During the war, everything felt grey, Ginny replied quietly. Everything was grey, Hermione said, and the words carried the echo of years they didn't often speak of in front of children. But there was nothing grey here. Madame Malkin's seemed determinedly warm, deliberately inviting. Even the potted plants flanking the entrance looked improbably lively, leaves glossy as though sunlight had been personally assigned to them. The shop promised comfort, the way some places promise safety, by refusing to let darkness be the last thing you remembered. A bell rang as they entered, an ordinary bell, clear and bright. No self-adjusting chord like Flourish and Blotts, but something honest that said, someone is here. Albus stepped into a space that felt busy without feeling frantic. Bolts of fabric lined the walls and stacked rainbows. Racks of robes turned slowly on their own, presenting options without demanding customers shuffle awkwardly in narrow aisles. Work tables held pin cushions that seemed to organize themselves, needles that threaded at a whispered command, and scissors that snipped experimentally at the air as if impatient for purpose. And the mirrors. One entire wall was mirror, except these were not mirrors in the way Albus understood mirrors. He drifted toward them, pulled by curiosity. His reflection smiled at him first, a warm, encouraging expression that didn't quite match his own nervous face. "First time for robes?" the reflection asked, voice kind as a familiar armchair. "Don't worry, everyone looks uncertain at the start. You look splendid. Perhaps Gryffindor red? Very flattering with your coloring." "It doesn't even know yet," Albus whispered, leaning toward Ginny. "About the sorting." "The mirrors are optimistic," Ginny said, amused. "They see potential, not just facts." From deeper in the shop came a voice Albus had only ever heard in stories, but somehow recognized instantly. Brisk, bustling, friendly, practiced. Madame Malkin herself emerged from behind a curtain, short and energetic, her tape measure floating beside her like a well-trained pet. "Hogwarts first years," she announced, though it sounded less like a question and more like a delighted declaration. Her gaze swept over the three children with the quick precision of someone who had fitted thousands. "Excellent, excellent. 3 today. Wonderful. Now, who's first?" Rose's hand shot up immediately. The eagerness so automatic, Ron chuckled. "That's my girl," Ron said. "First for everything. Eager students make the easiest fittings," Madame Malkin pronounced approvingly. "Up you go, dear. Name?" "Rose Granger Weasley," Hermione said. If the name meant something to Madame Malkin, if she noted the way Hermione's shoulders straightened, or the way Ron looked proud even when pretending not to, she didn't show it. Her professionalism didn't exclude warmth. It simply made it steady. "Lovely name," she said. and the tape measure leapt to life. It wrapped around Rose's shoulders, skated down her arms, traced her waist, measured inseams and hems. Numbers appeared in faint glowing script near Madame Malkin's head, like hovering notes. Rose stood perfectly still, because standing still was obviously the most efficient way to gather data, but her eyes tracked every movement as though she were studying a rare creature. "Mum," Rose said suddenly, "could I have extra pockets?" "Enchanted ones. For books and quills and things." Hermione smiled, unsurprised. "I was wondering when you'd ask." "Extra pockets," Madame Malkin agreed briskly. "Sensible. Expansion charms, too. Pockets that hold more than they should. Popular with Ravenclaws." She clicked her tongue thoughtfully. 3 school robes, winter cloak, formal dress robes, and dragon-hide gloves. Work robes come with standard reinforcement. Stain resistance, minor rip repair, temperature regulation, self-cleaning charms are extra. "Yes, please," Hermione said immediately. Ron made a helpless sound. "You're going to spoil her." "I'm going to prevent us doing laundry charms every other day," Hermione replied sweetly. "There's a difference." While Rose was measured and pinned and approved of, Albus wandered back to the mirrors. His reflection didn't speak this time, just offered the same small, encouraging smile. A little like Ginny's, a little like Harry's when he was trying not to show worry. "You'll be fine," a voice said nearby. Albus turned and found Scorpius standing a few feet away, also facing the mirrors, as if the reflections were safer to look at than the people. In the glass they stood side by side, 2 boys with complicated names and too many expectations. "How do you know?" Albus asked. Scorpius shrugged, small and honest. "I don't, really. My mum keeps saying it. She doesn't lie about important things." They fell into a silence that wasn't hostile, just awkward in the way new things were awkward. 2 children raised on old stories about each other, standing now in a robe shop with floating tape measures and mirrors that gave unsolicited reassurance. Eventually Scorpius spoke again, voice quiet and careful. "Your dad's Harry Potter." It wasn't quite a question, but it carried a whole world of meaning. Albus felt the familiar twist in his stomach. The way his father's name could make the air feel different. "Yeah," Albus said. Scorpius hesitated, then added, surprising Albus entirely. "That must be, I don't know." Albus blinked. Most people assumed it was only brilliant, only glorious. Like being the son of a famous man came with nothing but benefits. But Scorpius's eyes held something that looked like understanding. Like he knew what it was to carry a surname that arrived before you did. "Sometimes," Albus admitted. "Mine's Draco Malfoy," Scorpius said, barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Albus said, and the word felt different this time. Less like a label, more like a fact shared between them. "That's hard too," Scorpius said. "Different reasons, but hard." The silence that followed wasn't as sharp. It had softened, like something had been set down between them. Not friendship, not yet, but maybe the start of an agreement. You get it. "Next," Madame Malkin called cheerfully, and Albus startled as if he'd been caught thinking. He found himself guided onto the stool before he could protest. The tape measure descended like an eager insect and immediately began cataloguing him from every angle, while Madame Malkin made small, approving sounds. "Good shoulders," she muttered. "Straight back. Growing boy. We'll add length in the hems for growth spurts." Albus's face warmed as the tape went about its work. The whole process felt intensely personal in a way he hadn't expected. Like being measured wasn't just about fabric. It was about being translated into something official. Your father came in here once, Madame Malkin said conversationally, as if discussing weather. Tiny thing, all bones and enormous eyes. Look at him now. Albus glanced across the shop where Harry stood with Ginny, heads bent together. Harry looked ordinary, slightly rumpled, the way he often did, as though he'd forgotten to be impressive. But Albus saw what he'd started noticing more lately. Scars you only recognized if you knew where to look. The subtle stiffness in his left shoulder, the way his gaze always flicked toward doors and exits, even in peaceful places. Arms up, Madame Malkin instructed, and Albus obeyed, cheeks still burning. Fidgeting won't speed it up, she said, though her tone remained kindly. First robes always feel strange. You'll grow into them. Is it supposed to feel big? Albus asked quietly. Oh, yes, Madame Malkin replied immediately, as if this was the most sensible question in the world. If it didn't feel big, I'd worry about you. Right now, you're a boy in ordinary clothes. Soon you'll be a Hogwarts student in proper robes, and that makes things real. The tape measure finished with a little satisfied flutter and retreated. Standard school robes, winter cloak, formal robes, protective gloves, Madame Malkin listed. Any special requests? Your friend asked for expansion pockets. Albus considered. What did he even want? The thought that came surprised him with its simplicity. Could they be comfortable? He asked. Madame Malkin's face softened. A boy who knows what he needs. Yes, dear, softer weave, comfort charms, so they feel worn in from the start. Sometimes it helps. Helps what? Albus asked. Helps you feel like you already belong, she said simply, and the words settled in Albus's chest, like something that had been waiting there. Scorpius was last. Albus watched as Draco stood close, fingers repeatedly adjusting Scorpius's collar, straightening, smoothing, correcting a perfection that didn't need correcting. There was tenderness in the fussing, the kind that came from fear disguised as control. Stop it, Astoria murmured. But she was smiling. He's perfect. His collar's crooked, Draco said stubbornly. It's fine, Astoria replied. It doesn't have to be perfect. It should, Draco said, voice rougher than he seemed to intend. His first robes should be. Madame Malkin glanced up, taking in the tension with the professional's calm. They will be, she said kindly. Mr. Malfoy, your son's robes will be flawless. Every stitch correct, every charm properly placed. He'll look exactly as he should. Draco's jaw worked, as if he had more to say than he knew how to say. That's not, he began, then stopped and breathed. Thank you. I trust your work. They were told the robes would be ready within the hour, so they stepped back into Diagon Alley to wait. The street had shifted again. No longer fresh morning bustle, but that heavier midday crowd, families thickening as shopping lists got longer. The air thrummed with chatter and the occasional burst of accidental magic from children whose excitement leaked out of them in sparks and shimmers. Where next? Ron asked, but the answer was already pulling at them like gravity. Ollivanders sat at the far end of the street, its narrow storefront almost swallowed by the buildings around it. It looked unchanged by centuries and war and rebuilding, older than commerce, quieter than the bustle, like it existed on a slightly different rhythm. The display window was simple, a single wand resting on a purple cushion. No price tag, no gimmick, no glittering advertisement. Just the wand, waiting. Albus felt his heart begin to race. This was the moment that would determine something he couldn't properly name yet. Everyone said it. The wand chooses the wizard. But what if no one chose him? What if he stood there for hours, rejected again and again, until the air itself seemed to pity him? Stop catastrophizing, Ginny murmured at his ear, and Albus flushed because she was right. He was doing it again. Every witch and wizard finds their wand. You will too. But what if? No what ifs, Ginny said softly. Trust the process. The door opened silently, as if it had been waiting for them to arrive. Inside, the shop was dim, crowded, and close. Wand boxes climbed the walls in endless stacks, thin and long, like the ribs of some great sleeping creature. The air smelled of wood and something metallic, warm and sharp, like lightning trapped in a jar. Albus had expected an old man, Garrick Ollivander from his father's stories, pale-eyed and unsettling, appearing from the shadows like a ghost. Instead, a young man emerged from the back, perhaps 30, dark-haired, kind-eyed, with wire-rimmed glasses, and a careful manner that felt like respect made visible. Theo Ollivander, he introduced himself with quiet reverence, as though even names should be spoken gently here. Garrick Ollivander's grandson. He's retired now, but I apprenticed under him. The craft continues. Harry stepped forward, and Albus noticed the way his hand drifted unconsciously toward his pocket where his wand rested. Theo, Harry said, surprised but pleased. I remember you apprenticing. You must have been, 16? 17? Theo smiled, genuine and a little proud. You came in after the war, Mr. Potter. Needed your wand checked for damage. It still serves you? Perfectly, Harry said, and his voice warmed. Theo nodded, already knowing. Holly and phoenix feather. 11 inches, nice and supple. He glanced at Albus briefly, then back to Harry. A wand that's seen more than most wand makers ever will. Then Theo turned fully to the children, his attention sharpening into something focused and almost tender. Now then, he said, who's ready? No hands rose. Rose, Albus, and Scorpius all glanced at each other like suddenly they weren't sure how to step forward into something so defining. I'll go, Rose said abruptly, lifting her chin. Someone has to. Theo regarded her the way Hermione looked at difficult questions, not with judgment, but with interest. Rose Granger Weasley, he said softly. Your mother's wand is vine with dragon heartstring, 10 3/4. Your father's is willow with unicorn hair, 14, but you are neither of them. Rose's shoulders straightened. I myself. Theo's smile brightened. Good. That matters. He moved along the shelves, fingers brushing box after box, pausing, returning, as if listening for something the rest of them couldn't hear. It looked random. It felt deliberate. One chooses, Theo murmured almost to himself. I simply help it find the moment. He pulled down a box, opened it, and offered a pale wand. Cherry and unicorn hair. 9 inches. Try. Rose took it, flicked it experimentally, and immediately a shower of sparks, purple and green, exploded from the tip. Several boxes toppled from the shelves as if offended. Theo snatched the wand back with swift calm. No, definitely not. He tried again. Hazel and phoenix feather. 10 inches. Reasonably pliant, Rose waved. Nothing. No light, no spark, no warmth. Just a deadness in the wood, like holding a stick. Theo's brows lifted slightly. Also, no. More boxes came down, more attempts. Some produced dramatic protests, tiny explosions, a gust of wind that knocked dust from a shelf, a burst of bubbles that floated angrily near the ceiling, Others produced nothing at all. With each rejection, Rose's confidence flickered just a little, and Hermione shifted closer, offering silent steadiness. Then Theo paused. His hand hovered over a box tucked away, almost hidden in a corner, as if it had been waiting deliberately out of sight. He lifted it with care, opened it reverently, and inside lay a wand that seemed to glow faintly even in the dim shop, burnished, warm-toned wood, like sunlight caught in grain. "Vin," Theo said, voice softer now. "Like your mother's." "But not dragon heartstring." He held it up as if presenting something sacred. "Unicorn hair," he continued, "from a mare who lived wild in the forest of Dean. She gave 3 hairs in her lifetime. This is the last. 10.5 inches. Quite rigid at first, but it learns. It grows with its owner." Rose's hand trembled slightly as she took it. The instant her fingers wrapped around the handle, the air in the shop seemed to shift, as though everything paused to watch. Rose raised the wand, and golden light poured from the tip, warm, controlled, gentle. It spiraled through the dim space, like sunshine choosing where to land, then faded into a shimmer that hung in the air like mist. "Oh," Rose breathed, eyes wide. "Oh yes," Theo said, triumphant but quiet. "That's yours. Congratulations, Miss Granger Weasley." Hermione's eyes shone with tears. She pretended not to have. Ron hugged Rose fiercely, murmuring something Albus couldn't hear. Rose cradled her wand as though it might disappear as she loosened her grip. Albus watched, the anticipation in him tightening. Rose had her wand. Now it would be him and Scorpius. What would their wands say about them? What would the wood and core reveal? What if the wand chose a future he didn't want? Theo turned to the boys. "Now then, who's next?" Albus and Scorpius looked at each other. Something wordless passed between them. Fear, solidarity, the strange sense that they were already connected by the heaviness of their names. "Together," Scorpius suggested quietly. Not the same wand. Just at the same time. So neither of us has to wait alone." Albus felt something warm unfold in his chest. "Yeah," he said. "Together." Theo's eyebrows rose, but he nodded. "Unusual," he allowed. "But there's no rule against it. Wands are patient." Until he began selecting boxes, moving between them with practiced efficiency. For Scorpius, ebony, blackthorn, yew. Elegant woods that produced either harsh rejections or cold silence. For Albus, oak, cedar, rowan. Nothing felt right. The wands slid through his fingers like water that refused to be held. 10 wands. 15. 20. "This is normal," Theo assured them, though his expression had grown thoughtful. "Difficult matches often make the strongest bonds. The one that is easy to find is rarely the one that changes you." Finally, as if some invisible thread snapped into clarity, Theo drew 2 boxes from different parts of the shop. He held them for a moment, weighing something only he could sense, then nodded to himself. "Scorpius Malfoy," he said formally. "Hawthorn and unicorn hair. 10 inches exactly. Unyielding." The wand was pale, nearly white, beautiful in a way that felt slightly unsettling. Scorpius took it with trembling fingers, and immediately silver light burst from the tip, cold and brilliant as starlight. The radiance filled the shop, reflecting off boxes and walls, until everything looked like a winter sky. Scorpius gasped, and Draco's hand found Astoria's, their fingers lacing tightly as if holding on. Unyielding, Theo repeated softly. Hawthorn is associated with contradiction, protection and harm, hope and tragedy. It chooses those with complex natures, those who live with internal conflict. Unicorn hair provides consistency. It resists dark magic. That is a powerful wand, Mr. Malfoy. Use it well. Scorpius nodded, unable to speak, holding the wand like something fragile and infinite. Then Theo turned to Albus. His expression changed, solemn, almost careful. "And you," Theo said. "Albus Potter, I wondered if it might be this one. I've kept it, not sure who it was waiting for. I think I know now." He opened the final box. The wand inside was ash, dark grey wood with subtle grain, elegant without showiness. It looked quietly strong, like roots deep underground and branches reaching high. Something about it made Albus's breath catch. "Ash," Theo said quietly. "Phoenix feather. 10 3/4. Slightly springy." Theo's gaze flicked towards Harry for a fraction. "Ash is loyal," he continued. "It chooses owners who are courageous but not reckless. Those who think before acting but act decisively when it matters." And Phoenix feather, his voice softened. "Well, you know what that often means." Albus reached for it. The instant his fingers touched the smooth wood, he knew. It was like finding a missing piece he hadn't realized he'd been missing, like coming home to something that had always been meant for him. He raised the wand, and the light that emerged was neither Rose's golden warmth nor Scorpius's silver starlight. It was steady, firelit, the color of autumn leaves and hearth flames, and courage that didn't shout. The light filled the shop gently, thoroughly, then settled into contentment as though satisfied. "Yes," Theo said simply. "That's it. Your wand, Mr. Potter." Harry's hand came down on Albus's shoulder. When Albus looked up, his father's eyes were bright with emotion, and he didn't hide it. "Phoenix feather," Harry murmured. "Like mine." "Not the same," Theo said immediately. "Never the same. But related, perhaps. Brothers in a way. Connected, but destined for different paths. Like sons and fathers, the thought hung there without anyone needing to say it." They paid and boxed the wands carefully, Theo's movements precise as if the wood deserved ceremony. Albus couldn't stop touching the edge of his wand box afterward. Reassurance on repeat. "It's real. It chose me. It's mine." Rose held hers with scholarly reverence. Scorpius tucked his under one arm, protective and slightly possessive, like he didn't trust the world not to take it away. Outside, Diagon Alley had grown louder, fuller, late-day crowds thickening as families rushed to finish lists. And then, impossible to miss, Weasley's Wizard Wheezes exploded into view, bright enough to make neighboring shops look half asleep. The building blazed orange and purple, colors so vivid they seemed to hum. The windows were a carnival of motion, fireworks spelling rude words in midair before politely rearranging themselves into something family-friendly. Toys chased each other in loops. Something that might have been a rubber chicken performed an elegant somersault. But it was the sign above the door that made Albus's chest tighten. 2 identical figures were painted there, twins with matching grins. Wands raised like conductors of an orchestra of chaos. George and Fred together, as they'd been before everything changed, preserved in paint and memory. Ron stopped dead, just stopped, staring up. Hermione's hand found his, their fingers laced, steadying. "Dad?" Rose asked softly. "Are you okay?" I'm fine, Ron said roughly, which meant he wasn't. It never gets easier, does it? Seeing him up there, Harry moved close. No speech, just a hand on Ron's shoulder. Quiet comfort, the kind that didn't demand words. Ginny's expression went distant. Fred would have loved this, she said softly. He'd have had something ridiculous planned. Some grand welcome. He still might, Ron managed, a weak smile pulling at his mouth. You never could tell with Fred. Before they could even reach the door properly, it burst open and George Weasley appeared, older than the painted twin above, but unmistakably himself. There were grey streaks in his hair now, lines around his eyes, some from laughter, some from grief. He wore robes in the shop's violent orange, and his grin still carried the familiar spark. I was wondering when you lot would show up, George called. Been watching from the window. Come in, come in. First years wait for no one, and I've got things to show you. He swept them inside like a showman, and Albus's breath caught again. Weasley's wizard wheezes was chaos made deliberate. The ceilings soared impossibly high, expanded by magic to make room for flying products and demonstrations. Shelves rose to heights that shouldn't have been reachable, and ladders moved on their own, ferrying customers up and down. The noise was a physical thing. Laughter, bangs, controlled ones, squeaky product voices advertising themselves, music from self-playing instruments. A cluster of pygmy puffs chirped like vibrating pom-poms in a corner. Somewhere, something went bang, followed instantly by delighted squeals. The smell was just as layered. Sugar and sulfur, burned caramel and firecracker powder, something that might have been butterscotch mixed with something that definitely wasn't edible. Merlin, Rose breathed, completely undone. It's everything. It really is, Scorpius said quietly, eyes wide. George's gaze landed on the children, and his grin softened into something gentler. First time? He asked. 3 nods. Right then, George declared. Special tour for first years. Come along. He led them deeper, past extendable ears and skiving snack boxes, love potions with labels that loudly insisted for entertainment purposes only, and a section proudly marked portable swamps, because sometimes nature needs help. Then they passed another area, products that looked fun until you realized how serious they were. Shield hats, protective cloaks, defensive gadgets. George's hand brushed a shelf of shield hats, and his voice lowered. These, he said quietly, were for the bad times. Fred was particularly proud of these. He said if we could make protection fashionable, maybe more people would actually wear it. Did they work? Albus asked. They saved lives, Harry said from behind them, voice steady with certainty. I know they did. George nodded, accepting the praise with an uncharacteristic seriousness. Then he snapped back into performance mode, clapping his hands. But you lot won't need to worry about that, he said briskly. You're getting the peacetime experience. Fun stuff. He reached behind the counter and produced 3 identical parcels wrapped in orange paper with purple ribbon. For you, he announced, handing one to Rose first. Consider it a welcome gift from your dear Uncle George. Uncle George? Rose began, startled. You absolutely can? George cut in, waving her off. And you will. Family privilege. Besides, I remember what your parents endured from Fred and me. Consider it partial repayment. Or revenge. Depends on how you look at it. Ron made a strangled sound. George, what are you giving my daughter? Nothing dangerous, George said, too quickly to be believable. Then he grinned wickedly. Peace pop firecrackers. Completely harmless. Entirely spectacular. Guaranteed to make you interesting in your dormitory for at least a week. Rose took the box like it might bite. What do they do? That's the beauty, George said, eyes gleaming. You don't know until you set one off. Each one's different. Some make music, some make light, some make both. Once we had one that created a temporary aurora effect in the Great Hall. McGonagall was furious, also secretly impressed. Albus received his box next. It felt faintly warm in his hands, like contained mischief. Something made by Fred and George, legends in his family, their names threaded through every story. Scorpius hesitated when George held out the third. His eyes flicked to his parents, uncertain in a way that made Albus's chest pinch. Draco's face was complicated. Surprise, old pain, wariness, and something else beneath it. Go on, George said gently, and there was no showman in his tone now. It's just a gift, no strings, no expectations. Just welcome to a version of this world that includes laughter. Slowly, Scorpius reached out and took the box. His fingers trembled slightly as they closed around it. Thank you, Scorpius whispered. Really? Fred would have wanted you to have it, George said, and the sentence carried weight like a stone dropped into still water. He believed magic should bring joy, all of us. No exceptions. Draco's throat worked visibly. Astoria's hand found his arm, steadying him. George clapped his hands again, dispersing the heaviness like smoke. Right. On we go. Rose, since you're the scholarly type, this section will delight you. He guided them to a corner marked Educational Explosions. Learn while you laugh. Here the products were playful but purposeful. Potion kits, designed for safe practice. Spell sets that gave encouraging feedback. Flashcards that literally flashed when you were correct. Your mum helped with some of these, George told Rose. Hermione's idea, actually, she said learning doesn't have to be dull. So we built things that teach while entertaining. She wouldn't let me sell a single one until she was satisfied it was both educational and explosion-proof. That sounds like Mum, Rose said fondly, already reading labels like a starving person offered food. Albus wandered toward a Quidditch prank display. Bludgers that made rude noises. Practice snitches that insulted you in squeaky voices. Keeper gloves that tried to catch things that weren't there. Your mum was a terror on a broom, George said casually to Albus. Best chaser Gryffindor had in decades. Fred and I tested products on her. She'd tell us what was funny injury and what was actual injury. Good times. She doesn't talk about that much, Albus admitted. Good memories got tangled with bad, George said quietly. War interrupted a lot. She was meant to go pro, you know. Harpies wanted her. After priorities changed, doesn't mean she wasn't brilliant. Scorpius drifted toward a different shelf. Muggle magic tricks. Pranks that didn't require a wand. Illusions built on misdirection and skill. He examined disappearing coins with the same focused attention he'd shown the herbology book. Interesting choice, George observed, appearing beside him. Most wizards ignore the Muggle section. They think, why bother without magic? Fred and I always liked it. There's something elegant about doing it purely with hands and timing. It's clever, Scorpius said quietly. Magic makes things easier. This, you have to understand how attention works. Where people look, what they expect. It's like precision, like potions. George's eyebrows lifted. "Smart kid," he said, genuinely impressed. "Here." He pulled a slim book from the shelf and shoved it into Scorpius's hands. "Sleight of hand for the magical-minded. On the house. Consider it an investment in a future loyal customer." Bear. Scorpius held the book like a treasure, as reverent as Rose with her wand. "Thank you," he said again. Softer this time. "Really." The shop's energy roared around them, but in their small orbit something quieter was happening. 3 children were being welcomed into legacy, into Fred and George's refusal to let darkness be the final story, into the belief that laughter was a kind of protection and joy a kind of victory. Somewhere behind them a test demonstration went wrong. A pop of purple smoke, glitter raining down, a chorus of delighted shrieks. George sighed like a man who'd seen this 1,000 times. "That'll be someone testing the new whiz-bang discs without reading instructions," he muttered. "Excuse me." He hurried off, slightly singed a moment later, grinning anyway. "Crisis averted," he announced. "Customers fine, just sparkly, might wear off in a few hours. Or a day." As George vanished again, the parents clustered near a wall where a portrait of Fred hung, not the public sign outside, but a smaller painting. Fred caught mid-laugh, forever young. "Do you think he knows?" Ron asked suddenly, voice quiet and thick. "About all this? About Rose and Albus and Hugo and James and Lily, everything?" "S," Hermione said firmly, as if certainty was the only acceptable answer. "However it works, wherever he is, yes, he knows. He'd be delighted," Ginny whispered. "He loved beginnings, said they were blank pages full of potential for mischief." Harry smiled faintly. "Fred once told me the best part of Hogwarts was watching first years work out which rules were important and which ones were there specifically to be broken, creatively." "That sounds like him," Ron said, and the words were steadier now, anchored by shared memory. Rose stepped closer to the portrait, staring at the face of an uncle she'd never met but had known all her life through stories. She stood still for a long moment, then spoke so softly Albus almost didn't hear. "I wish I'd known you," Rose said. "Everyone says you were brilliant. Funny and brave and brilliant." The portrait didn't move. This wasn't a Hogwarts portrait. It was paint. But the fixed expression of joy seemed, somehow, to make space for her words. Albus moved to stand beside her. After a moment's hesitation, Scorpius joined them, 3 children beneath a laughing face, the living proof of what had been protected. "The war stories always sound so dark," Albus murmured. "But this is different. This is light." "That's the point," Harry said, joining them. "That's what they fought for. Not just ending darkness, keeping the shops that exist just to make people laugh." Fred understood that. George returned, watching the 3 children in front of the portrait. His grin softened again. "He'd have liked you lot," he said. "All of you." He'd have had personalized pranks lined up for your first week, probably involving your famous parents. "Tell them about the McGonagall prank," Ginny suggested, the memory pulling a smile from her. "Oh, that one," George said, eyes lighting. "5th year. Fred and I enchanted every suit of armor to sing carols, but only when McGonagall walked past. Took her 3 days to work out it was us. She gave detention and house points. First time that ever happened. She was furious, also secretly impressed. One story led to another. George talking with the practiced ease of someone who had learned to speak about his lost twin. without collapsing under it. The shop's chaos continued to pulse around them, but in their circle time slowed, making room for laughter and the gentle ache of remembering. Eventually, they had to move on. Lists weren't finished. Daylight wasn't endless. "Before you go," George said, stopping them near the door, "one more thing." He disappeared into the back and returned with a large bag. "Samples," he announced brightly. "New products we're testing. Consider yourselves field researchers. Try them at Hogwarts. Tell me what works, what doesn't, what gets you told off by professors." "George," Hermione warned. "Nothing that'll get them expelled," George protested. "Just mildly reprimanded. At worst, probably." Ron laughed, lighter now than when they'd entered. "That's the most Fred thing you've said all day." George's grin turned soft. "I'll take that as a compliment," he said quietly. "Because it is." They stepped back out into Diagon Alley, arms heavy with bags, pockets heavier with secret gifts. Albus felt the day pressing toward evening, time gathering itself up like fabric being folded. The street still glowed with possibility, but they had walked a long way through it now. Books, robes, wands, jokes, and ice cream promised ahead like a final sweetness. And, as they moved on, Albus realized something. The day hadn't just filled his hands with purchases, it had filled him with moments, small shifts and quiet understandings that felt like the real preparation. They left Weasley's wizard wheezes, carrying more than bags. They carried noise in their ears, laughter in their ribs, and the strange comfort that came from being reminded by fireworks and silly toys and a shop that refused to be solemn, that the world could survive heartbreak and still choose joy. Outside, the afternoon had tipped toward that in-between hour where everything felt both endless and hurried. The sun hadn't set, but it had softened, slanting low enough to paint the upper stories of Diagon Alley in warm amber, while the street level stayed pleasantly cool in shadow. The cobblestones underfoot held heat, radiating it gently through shoe soles. A few witches flicked cooling charms across their faces, shimmering air that lasted a moment and then vanished. A street vendor offered enchanted lemonade that shifted flavor with each sip. Lemon, then strawberry, then something that tasted like rain on warm stone. "The apothecary next," Hermione said, consulting her increasingly battered list. The parchment had been folded and unfolded so many times it looked exhausted. "Potion supplies. It's best if you pick ingredients yourselves when you can. Fresh matters." Rose's eyes sharpened into that particular gleam she got when knowledge was involved. "We get to choose?" "I thought they'd just hand us standard kits." "They offer both," Hermione said as they walked. "Standard is fine, but choosing teaches you what quality looks like. The color of good wormwood, the scent of proper peppermint. How a decent bezoar feels those details become instinct later." The apothecary sat wedged between a dusty shop selling crystal spheres and a newer storefront advertising modern protective charms for anxious citizens. Its front window displayed jars and vials like a museum collection, beetles suspended in golden fluid, ginger root crystallized into glittering shapes, and a dark slab labeled, very calmly, dragon liver. Preserved, do not tap the glass. The door creaked when they entered. No chimes, no melody, just old hinges doing their job. The smell hit first and hard. Herbs and minerals, sharp and sweet, earthy and acrid at once. It was the scent of change. The scent of things that could become other things. Inside the shop was a careful chaos. Shelves climbed to the ceiling. Every counter was crowded with jars, bundles, pouches, boxes. Labels ranged from neat and precise to barely legible scribbles that looked like they'd been written in a hurry during an emergency. Dried nettles, powdered silver, Extract of belladonna, handle with care. Unicorn horn shavings, ethically sourced, ethically sourced. A bundle of something that looked like roots was labeled simply, "Do not sniff." Behind the counter stood a young witch with dark skin and alert, intelligent eyes. Her hair was braided tightly, threaded with tiny living vines that shifted as she moved. An apron covered in permanent stains told its own story. Work, practice, expertise. "First years," she said warmly, smiling like she'd seen this exact brand of overwhelm all day. "You have the look, excited, terrified, trying not to show either too much. I'm Afua. I run the shop now. My grandmother owned it before me, and her mother before her. 3 generations of knowing which beetle eyes are worth the extra sickles." Rose took a breath like she was approaching an exam question. "We need potion supplies," she said. "Standard list. But Mum says we should choose our own ingredients if possible." Afua's smile widened. "Your mum is right. Kits are adequate, but selecting teaches you to see. Come on, I'll show you." She moved through the cramped aisles with the confidence of someone who didn't have to think about where things were. Her hands went up, down, sideways, collecting items with fluid certainty. "Potions is precision," Afua said as she lifted a jar of silvery powder into the light. "But it's also relationship. Ingredients aren't just objects. They have nature, temperament, potential. Learn those, and half your mistakes disappear." "Powdered moonstone," she said, tilting the jar. The powder shimmered faintly, catching the light like frost. "See that? Fresh, properly ground. Old moonstone goes dull. It still works for simple drafts, but for anything tied to lunar correspondence, you want that glimmer." Rose leaned in, studying it like it was a rare animal. She nodded slowly, storing the detail away. Afua set the moonstone aside and produced a small bundle of dried leaves, curled and grey-green, wormwood, vital for more things than most students realize. Quality wormwood still carries a faint bitterness even when dried. If it smells like nothing, it's too old. Use your nose as much as your eyes. She handed it to Rose. Rose inhaled carefully, then nodded. "I can smell it. Bitter, clean, bitter. Not dusty." Afua looked delighted. "Good instincts. Very good." Albus watched Rose become someone he recognized from observing Hermione over the years. Completely absorbed, the world narrowing until only information mattered. For a moment he envied that certainty. The way Rose could walk into something intimidating and turn it into something manageable by studying it. "And you?" Afua asked, turning to Albus with a kindness that felt like a hand offered rather than a question asked. "Do you want to choose yours, or would you prefer a standard kit?" Albus hesitated. The shop felt like too much. Too many jars, too many unspoken rules, too many ways to be wrong. I don't know enough," he admitted. "Then I'll teach you 3 things," Afua said, as if that settled it. "Only 3. First, bezoars." She produced a lumpy grey stone that looked unimpressive, the sort of thing you might kick aside on a path. She placed it in Albus's palm. It was heavier than expected, warm from the shop. "These save lives," Afua said, voice firm. "They counteract most poisons. Every kit should have one, and you should always know where it is. Not buried under books. Not forgotten. Accessible." Holding it made Albus feel strangely steadier, as if preparedness had weight. Second, Fresh versus dried. Afua lifted a bundle of peppermint. Even through the shop's strong scents, it smelled bright. Some things are better fresh. Peppermint, for example. Others need drying or preservation. Your books will tell you which. But here's a trick. Fresh ingredients are more forgiving. They're alive. They want to work with you. Dried ingredients are stable and precise, that they punish sloppy mistakes. As a first year, choose fresh when you can. Albus nodded, storing that away too. And third, he asked. Afua's smile turned faintly mischievous. Third, your potions professor will be strict. They all are. It's like a requirement. They'll seem unreasonable sometimes, but they do it because potions can hurt people. Precision matters. So when they sound harsh, remind yourself. Sternness is often safety wearing an unfriendly face. Harry, behind Albus, made a soft sound of agreement. That would have helped to hear when I was 11, he said quietly, while Hermione guided Rose through selecting ingredients, asking questions, comparing quality, letting Rose handle and smell and decide. Scorpius drifted toward a darker corner of the shop where rare herbs sat behind glass. The handling warnings longer, the prices noticeably higher. Scorpius's fingers hovered over a vial marked Ditani, fresh cut. Afua appeared at his side like she'd been expecting him. But interested in Ditani? Scorpius startled slightly, then nodded. I read about it at Flourish and Blotts. The book said it doesn't exactly heal. It convinces the body it wasn't hurt. Afua's eyebrows rose in approval. That's a very good way of putting it. Detenity is philosophically fascinating. It doesn't force the body into obedience. It persuades it to remember wholeness. Scorpius stared at the green stems suspended in solution, as if he could see that idea inside them. Plants are patient, he said quietly. They don't demand. They just grow. If you care for them, they become what they're meant to be. Something in his tone made Draco shift closer without intruding, like a man stepping nearer to warmth while pretending it's for safety. They're good teachers, Afua agreed. Patience, yes. Also resilience. A plant can be damaged and still thrive in the right conditions. They don't hold grudges. They respond to the present. She paused, weighing her words, then added, You'll probably enjoy herbology. Professor Longbottom is excellent. Very knowledgeable. Very kind. Plants respond to care, not force, and he understands that. Neville, Harry said warmly. Professor Longbottom. He's one of the bravest people I know, and he's brilliant with plants. Scorpius, you'll learn a lot from him. Scorpius nodded, and a small tension in his shoulders eased as if being seen in this particular way, noticed for interest rather than name, was a relief. Afua lifted a small vial. Ooh. Would you like fresh Dissertiny for your kit? It's more expensive than preserved, but it's more responsive. You can actually see how it reacts if you treat it properly. Yes, Scorpius said immediately. Please. They gathered purchases, vials wrapped carefully, bundles tied, protective gloves for handling what shouldn't touch bare skin, stirring rods of different materials for different potion types. Albus watched older students arrive, robes marked with house colors, voices confident, ordering ingredients by name as if the shop belonged to them. Rose stared openly, longing and determination tangled in her face. Someday, that would be her. Comfortable. Certain. Not overwhelmed. Ron checked his watch with exaggerated drama. We're doing well, he announced. What's next? And please, no more books. Rose has enough to open a small franchise. Quality Quidditch supplies, Ginny said, and the way she spoke made it sound like a law of nature. Hermione lifted a brow. The most important shop in the alley. The most important, Ginny said firmly, grin tugging at her mouth. They stepped back into Diagon Alley, carrying the apothecary's scent with them. Herbs and minerals, sharpness and possibility. The street had thickened. Families flowed around them like a river. Owl cages bobbed. Trunks bumped shins. Shopkeepers called out last-minute offers. The day felt louder now, but also more familiar, as if Diagon Alley was slowly letting them belong. Quality Quidditch supplies sat in a prime position near the center of the alley, its large window displaying a single broom suspended in air, rotating slowly so every angle could be admired. A small plaque read, "Firebolt X, faster than light, almost." Even Albus, who wasn't sure Quidditch was his thing, could admit it was beautiful. The handle gleamed, the bristles arranged in aerodynamic perfection. It looked like speed made solid. Ginny actually stopped walking. Oh, she breathed, reverence in her voice like prayer. Oh, that's gorgeous. It's a broom, Hermione said, but even she sounded impressed despite herself. It's not just a broom, Ginny replied. It's engineering. It's art. Harry laughed, already resigned. You say you'll only look every time, he told her. And sometimes I only look, Ginny lied cheerfully. They went inside. The shop felt like heaven for anyone who loved flying. Brooms lined the walls in ascending tiers of quality and cost. Quidditch robes hung on mannequins frozen mid-dive, displaying proper form. Practice snitches zipped through the air in elaborate patterns. Keeper gloves hung in neat rows, and bludger-proof padding sat stacked like armor. The proprietor looked up mid-conversation and did a visible double-take. Ginny Potter, Merlin's beard. I haven't seen you in years, since you retired. Ginny smiled, pleased to be remembered. Just here with my son, she said, and then, because she couldn't resist, first-year shopping. Whispers moved through the shop. People turned their heads. Ginny Potter, née Weasley, Holyhead Harpies chaser, known for impossible catches and fearless dives. Ginny either didn't hear or didn't care. Her attention was on the Firebolt X, eyes sharp as she circled it like a professional appraising a masterpiece. They fixed the tail drag, she murmured, hovering her hand just above the handle, as if feeling the magic without touching it. Weight distribution is perfect. That bristle arrangement. Merlin. They've done it. This is extraordinary. The proprietor's face lit up with hope. Would you demonstrate? He asked. We have a testing area. Nothing grand, but enough for basic maneuvers. Customers would love it. Ginny glanced at Harry. Harry's answer was in the simple tilt of his head. Permission given. Then Ginny looked at Albus, and something passed between them. An invitation. A silent question. Do you want to see who I was? Why not? Ginny said, grin turning mischievous. It's been a while since I flew something this nice. They followed the proprietor through a door marked Staff Only and stepped into what should have been a tiny courtyard. It wasn't. The moment they crossed the threshold, space unfolded. The area expanded into a broad testing field with open sky overhead, even though they were surrounded by buildings. Extension charms, Hermione murmured appreciatively. Expensive ones. The sky illusion is masterful. Ginny mounted the Firebolt X with the ease of habit. The instant her hands closed around the handle, she changed. It wasn't dramatic, but it was absolute. Her posture shifted into something certain. Her face sharpened into focus. She wasn't just Mum anymore. She was the flyer she'd been, athlete, competitor, joy made airborne. She kicked off lightly, and the broom responded, like it had been waiting for someone who understood it. The acceleration was smooth and powerful. Ginny rose straight up, then executed a perfect barrel roll, so clean it looked effortless. The crowd, because of course a crowd gathered, gasped, then cheered. Ginny banked and dove, pulled up into a climb so steep it felt impossible, then leveled out and streaked across the field at a speed that blurred her into motion. Her robe snapped. Her hair came loose, flying wild behind her. And her face, Albus couldn't stop staring at her face, held pure, uncomplicated joy. She performed maneuvers Albus didn't have names for. Complex arcs, tight turns, a dive that ended in a sudden, precise stop, as if she'd grabbed the air itself and told it to behave. People clapped. Then more people clapped. The space rang with applause. Finally, Ginny descended and landed softly. Dismounting like gravity was merely a polite suggestion. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, and she was breathing hard. But she looked younger, lighter. "That broom is perfection," she declared to the proprietor. "Tell your suppliers they've outdone themselves." Responsive, without being twitchy. Phenomenal acceleration. Stable in complex maneuvers. Best thing I've ever flown. The proprietor looked like Christmas had come early. "Would you consider a testimonial?" he asked, hopeful. Harry stepped in gently, firm but kind. "No, she's retired from public life. This was just for fun." "Just for fun," Ginny agreed, though her gaze drifted back to the broom with longing. "Merlin, I'd give a lot to own one." "Christmas," Harry suggested dryly. "It costs more than some people make in a year," Ginny shot back. "Easter, then," Harry said. Ginny laughed and kissed his cheek. "You're ridiculous." As they returned through the shop, Ginny accepted compliments with grace. Albus caught questions aimed his way. Did he fly? Had he inherited her talent? Rose informed anyone unfortunate enough to make eye contact that Quidditch involved more physics than most people realized. Scorpius hung back with his parents. "Your mother used to fly," Draco said quietly to Scorpius as they watched Ginny's afterglow. "Before you were born, she was good." Astoria smiled. "Not professional, but I loved it."
Why did you stop?
Scorpius asked. Astoria's smile turned gentle, honest. "When the illness started affecting my balance, it became dangerous. I miss it sometimes." "But I found other ways to feel free." Scorpius frowned slightly, thinking. "Freedom isn't one thing," Astoria added. "It's many. You get to choose which ones matter." They stepped back into Diagon Alley, and Albus felt the day catch up with him all at once. His legs ached. His head buzzed with impressions. His heart felt too full. One day, just one. And the magical world had shifted from story to something he'd touched and breathed and carried. Almost finished, Hermione announced, checking her list. Books, robes, wands, potion supplies, miscellaneous. "We just need to collect the robes from Madame Malkin's." Then she paused and smiled, with the satisfaction of a general who knows the battle is won. "And then," Hermione said, "I think we've earned ice cream." Ron's face transformed. "Ice cream," he repeated reverently. "Finally. A subject I excel at." They collected their finished robes. Madame Malkin had outdone herself. Rose's robes had expansion pockets that could probably fit an entire bookshelf. Albus's felt like they'd been lived in already, soft, comfortable, familiar, in a way that soothed something in his chest. Scorpius's hung perfectly, making him look older, steadier, like someone who belonged without needing to prove it. They stepped back into the alley carrying bundles that felt heavier than fabric. These weren't just clothes, they were uniforms. Proof. A pull declarations, and the world had shifted again. Snow drifted down. Not thick, storm snow. Not wet, slushy snow. Gentle flakes, slow and delicate, falling from nowhere. Or maybe from the alley itself. They didn't melt. They settled like a dusting of magic over awnings and cobblestones, over shoulders and hair, turning Diagon Alley into an illustration in a beautiful book. Snow? Albus said, blinking. But it's nearly September. Magical snow, Ginny explained, holding out her hand. Flakes landed and glittered faintly on her skin. The alley does this sometimes, especially on days like this. Atmospheric magic, Hermione murmured, almost pleased. It makes itself match the feeling. Rose stuck her tongue out and caught a snowflake with complete lack of dignity. Hermione laughed softly, eyes bright. Scorpius watched the flakes spiral through lamplight, tracking individual ones as if they were messages. It's beautiful, he whispered. It is, Astoria said, her hand resting warmly on his shoulder. Magic does beauty well when it chooses to. They walked toward Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor. Albus knew from stories it had been destroyed in the war. Fortescue himself taken and never returned. But the shop had been rebuilt, made new, while still remembering what it owed. Warm light spilled from its windows. The sign above the door read something like a promise. Florian Fortescue's. Established 1976. Rebuilt 1999. Forever serving joy. Beneath, smaller letters. Dedicated to Florian, who believed ice cream could mend almost anything. Inside, it was cozy without being cramped. Round tables scattered with mismatched chairs that somehow fit together. Walls painted in warm creams and soft pinks. Framed photographs showed the original shop. Fortescue with his magnificent mustache. Hogwarts students celebrating house wins with messy Sundays. Behind the counter, glass cases displayed flavors that ranged from ordinary to baffling. Traditional vanilla, chocolate explosion, butterbeer swirl, lavender starlight, pumpkin pasty cream, phoenix feather fusion, and one label that simply read, Marauder's Choice. Changes daily, don't ask why. A young wizard behind the counter looked up and grinned. First years, he said with certainty. That obvious? Ron asked. The bags, the exhausted parents, the way the kids keep touching their wand boxes like they'll vanish, the wizard said cheerfully. Been serving first-year families all day. Take your time. Samples are encouraged if you're indecisive. Albus stared at the flavors and felt overwhelmed all over again, but in a softer way. Too many choices. Too much possibility. Start simple, Harry suggested quietly, leaning in. You can try something wild next time. Next time? Albus repeated. There's always a next time, Harry said. Christmas. Summer. Summer. It's not your only chance. The words loosened a knot inside Albus. Not one chance. Not one doorway that closed forever. The magical world wasn't a single day. It was a life he was stepping into. He ordered peppermint with chocolate shavings. Rose chose something named Ravenclaw's Wisdom. Blueberry, vanilla, edible silver stars. Hermione whispered, it was mostly marketing. Ron ordered an alarming number of scoops in a heroic display of commitment to joy. Scorpius chose Quiet Moon, pale ice cream that shimmered faintly, flavored with vanilla and lavender, and something subtle that tasted like calm. They pulled 2 tables together near the back. They naturally clustered, Potters on one end, Weasleys in the middle, Malfoys on the other, but the distance felt less like separation and more like respectful space. Old lines softened, not erased, maybe never erased, but not sharp. The bowls arrived in generous portions, served in enchanted glass, that kept the ice cream perfectly cold, while staying comfortable to touch. Small magic, quiet magic, the kind that existed simply to make life nicer. Albus took his first bite and closed his eyes. Peppermint burst bright and clean, winter in a spoon. Chocolate cut through it, rich and dark. The combination tasted like celebration and comfort at once. Good? Ginny asked, and Albus could only nod, mouth too full. Around them the parlor hummed with low conversation. Other families unwound the day, but at their tables something different began. What happens when movement stops and reflection has room to breathe? I can't believe we're really going, Rose said softly, spoon tracing a thoughtful spiral through her ice cream. To Hogwarts. It's been this future thing forever, and now it's next week. Next week, Hermione echoed gently. Terrifying, isn't it? And wonderful. Hermione's gaze went distant, memory surfacing. I remember my first day, completely overwhelmed. Convinced I'd made a mistake. Convinced everyone would notice I didn't belong. Then Professor McGonagall transfigured something, made the impossible look effortless. And I thought, if I get to learn that, then it's worth whatever else happens. Albus's fear, the one that had been quietly growing all day, found its way. What if I'm not in Gryffindor? He asked, voice small. Everyone expects. Dad was. Mum was. James is. What if I'm not? Harry set down his spoon and turned fully toward him. The whole table seemed to quiet slightly, as if listening. Al, Harry said carefully. The Sorting Hat wanted to put me in Slytherin. Albus's eyes widened. Really? Really? Harry said. It told me I could be great there. That it would help me on my way. And I was 11 and terrified. And the only thing I knew about Slytherin then was Voldemort. So I begged to be anywhere else. And the hat listened. Harry paused, making sure Albus was hearing the real message. I've thought about that moment for years, Harry said, and here's what I've learned. The hat doesn't just see what you are. It sees what you value, what you might become, what you'll need. Any house would be lucky to have you, and whatever house you end up in will be right, because it will be yours. Ron nodded along, warmed by the moment, and unable to resist adding his own. I was terrified I'd end up in Hufflepuff, he said. Not because Hufflepuff's bad, because it isn't, but because all my brothers were Gryffindor, and I wanted to match them. But you know what? Percy was Gryffindor, and still managed to be a pompous git for years. House doesn't decide character. Choices do. Albus swallowed, pushing deeper. What if people judge me? What if they expect me to be like you, Dad, and I'm not? Harry's face softened with something older than today. Old pain, old understanding. Then they'll be judging you for things you haven't done and can't control, he said. They aren't worth your time. Focus on the people who see you. Not your name, not your family story, not their expectations. Across the table, Scorpius had gone very still. His ice cream was melting slightly, forgotten. Draco noticed immediately. He always did. His attention snapped to his son, like a protective spell. "What's wrong?" Draco asked quietly. Scorpius stared down at his bowl. "Fine," he whispered.
What?
"If I'm in Slytherin," he whispered. "What if people think? What if they assume?" He didn't finish. But nobody needed him to. The Malfoy name carried weight. Slytherin carried history. Some of it unfair. Some of it earned. Peace didn't erase association overnight. "Then you show them who you are," Astoria said firmly. "Not what they fear, not what they expect. What you choose to be." She looked around the table, voice steady. "Slytherin has produced brilliant minds, innovators, strategists. It has also produced darkness. The house doesn't make you. Your choices do." Harry spoke again, surprising everyone. "My mother was nearly in Slytherin," he said. Hermione blinked in surprise. Ron's eyebrows climbed. Even Draco looked up. "Lily Evans," Harry said softly. "Clever, determined, fiercely protective." The Hat considered Slytherin. She ended up in Gryffindor, but she could have thrived anywhere. Scorpius's hope flickered visibly. "Really? Really?" Harry said. "So, if you're in Slytherin, you're not doomed. You'll be in a house with history, yes. But you'll also have the chance to help shape what that house becomes in peace. To be part of making it mean something better." Something shifted at the tables. Not dramatic, but real. The air between Potters, Weasleys, and Malfoys felt a little less guarded, as if a door had been left slightly open. Rose listened to all of this, while eating with methodical focus. Then she set her spoon down with sudden decision. "I think we should make a pact," she announced. "A pact," Ron repeated, suspicious. "The three of us," Rose said, pointing with her spoon at herself, Albus, and Scorpius. "No matter what houses we get, we stay friends. Or we try to. We don't let house rivalries or family histories or other people's expectations decide how we treat each other." Scorpius hesitated, and his honesty came out. "That's idealistic." "Maybe," Rose said, "but someone has to start. Someone has to decide that our generation can be different. Why not us?" Albus looked at Rose, brilliant, overwhelming, kind, then at Scorpius, still mostly a stranger, but also someone who'd shared this day, who'd understood something about heavy names, who talked about plants like they were philosophy. "Okay," Albus said. "I'm in." Scorpius glanced at Draco. Draco's expression was complicated. Surprise, uncertainty, and something like hope he didn't want to admit to. But he gave a small nod. "Yes," Scorpius said, voice steadier. "Okay, we try." "Excellent," Rose declared, satisfied, like a solicitor sealing a deal. She pulled out a napkin and, because, of course, she had one, a quill. "You have a quill," Albus said, half amused. "A pact needs documentation," Rose said seriously, already writing. Ron groaned. "Rose, you're writing a friendship pact on a napkin." "It's the principle, not the medium," Rose replied without looking up. "Also, napkins are absorbent, so the ink—" "Just write it," Ron said, fond despite himself. Rose wrote in careful, neat script. "We, the undersigned, pledge that regardless of sorting, family history, or outside pressure, we will treat each other with fairness, attempt friendship in good faith, and refuse to let old prejudices dictate new relationships. Signed this day in Florian Fortescue's, witnessed by snowfall and chocolate. She signed first with a flourish and handed the napkin to Albus. His signature looked smaller beside hers, less confident, but it was there. Then Scorpius took it and stared for a moment before writing his name in elegant, careful letters. 3 names, 1 date. A small rebellion. Hermione's eyes shone. Harry looked like he might say something profound, then simply squeezed Ginny's hand instead. Draco stared at his son's signature like it was a fragile treasure, something he'd been afraid was impossible. They ate more slowly after that, letting the moments settle into them. Outside the windows, magical snow continued to drift through lamplight, turning the alley into a soft dream. The parlor filled as evening deepened. More families, more first years, more parents carrying that complicated mixture of pride and grief that came with watching children prepare to leave home. Reluctantly, Hermione checked the time again. "We should go," she said, voice gentle but firm. "It's getting late. Packing still needs doing." "Packing," Rose repeated, and her face changed as the reality hit properly. "We're really leaving." "You'll be brilliant," Hermione said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "All of you." Nervous, yes. Overwhelmed, sometimes, yes. But brilliant. They stood to leave with bags rustling and glass dishes clinking softly. As they moved toward the door, the young wizard behind the counter called out, "Wait, first-year tradition. You get to sign the wall." He gestured towards a section near the back. The wall there was covered in names and dates, layer upon layer, stretching back years like sediment. Hundreds, thousands, evidence of every first year who'd sat here with sticky fingers and wide eyes, marking themselves into tradition. One by one, they approached. Rose signed neatly. Rose Granger, Weasley, the 1st of September 2017. Albus wrote, Albus Potter, the 1st of September 2017. His handwriting looked smaller against the wall of history, but it mattered anyway. Scorpius signed last in elegant script. Scorpius Malfoy, the 1st of September 2017. "There," the wizard said, satisfied. "Now you're part of it. Come back at Christmas and find your names. Years from now, you'll bring your own kids and point and say, 'That's where I signed. That's where it began.'" The thought felt both impossible and inevitable. They stepped back out into the snowy evening. Diagon Alley had thinned slightly, the rush easing. Shop windows glowed warmer now, lanterns and enchanted lights making the street feel like a story that wanted to be remembered. "Ready to head back?" Harry asked Albus quietly. Albus looked down the alley, at the shops that had welcomed them, the cobblestones that had witnessed his day becoming real. He thought of his wand in its box, his robes in their bundle, the pact on the napkin tucked carefully away, the signatures on the wall. "Yeah," he said, "but I'm glad we came. I'm glad we did all of this." "Me too," Harry said simply, hand warm on his shoulder. They walked back toward the leaky cauldron, 3 families moving together. Not merged, not suddenly best friends, but aligned in a way that would have seemed impossible years ago. The courtyard waited like a quiet breath between worlds. Their walk back felt different from the morning. Slower. Softer. The anticipation that had buzzed in Albus's veins at sunrise had become a gentler ache. The sadness of endings mixed with the satisfaction of having made it through something important. Snow continued to drift lazily. Shop lights threw rectangles of gold across the street. Albus's bags bumped his legs. He carried his wand box separately, unable to let it out of his awareness. Every few steps, his fingers brushed the edge of it, as if to confirm it was still there. Beside him, Rose was already planning trunk organization. Even if trunks are bigger inside, she muttered, there are still principles. Weight distribution. Accessibility. Accessibility. Categorization. You know they're enchanted, Ron said, amused. You could fit an entire library. Principles transcend space, Rose said firmly. Hermione and Ginny shared a quiet smile. Recognition, fondness, the knowledge that some traits were inherited more strongly than hair color. Ahead, Scorpius walked between his parents, herbology book visible now, no longer hidden, and he was talking quietly to Astoria with unexpected animation. Draco walked slightly apart, eyes scanning like habit. But his shoulders were less tight than earlier. The day hadn't been what he'd feared. No public rejection. No cold cruelty. Not perfect acceptance either, but not hostility. The absence of that felt like a gift. They passed Ollivanders, now dark and closed, but still somehow watchful. Thousands of wands waiting inside, potential asleep in boxes. Do you think wands get lonely? Albus asked suddenly. The ones that haven't chosen anyone yet. Harry considered, as if it mattered. I think they're patient, he said. Some wands wait years, decades. But when the right witch or wizard arrives, when that bond happens, then the waiting doesn't matter anymore. That's very philosophical for someone who failed divination, Ginny teased. Harry snorted. I failed it 3 times, actually. Their laughter echoed between ancient buildings, warm and human. They passed Flourish and Blotts, its windows still alive with books arranging themselves, the apothecary with its sharp scent seeping faintly through cracks. Quality Quidditch supplies with the Firebolt X, no doubt now back behind glass. Weasley's wizard wheezes blazing bright even in evening. Fred and George's painted grins eternal. George must have been watching because he appeared in the doorway and waved. Get home safe, he shouted. Then, to Rose, I want a full report on those peace pops in a dormitory environment. I'm not setting them off, Rose called back, scandalized. I'm going to observe their effects, she amended primly when Ron made a face. Controlled environment. That's different. Sure it is, Ron said fondly. The leaky cauldron came into view, its crooked sign creaking gently. Warm light spilled from the windows. The sounds of conversation and clinking dishes drifted out. It looked ordinary again. A bridge between 2 worlds. At the boundary where Diagon Alley ended and the courtyard began, they paused, the invisible line between impossible and mundane. No one spoke at first. It was the kind of silence that happened when you didn't want the next step to erase what you'd just lived. One more look, Albus said softly. So they turned, adults and children, and looked back. Diagon Alley curved away, glowing, snowy, beautiful. Shops lit like jewels set into stone. The street looked like it was holding its breath for the next story. I want to remember this, Rose whispered. Exactly like this. How it looks, how it feels. You will, Hermione promised. First days mark you. Scorpius's voice came out small. Will it always be here? The alley? Harry answered with the weight of experience. Yes, he said. It survived wars. Centuries. It will still be here. Shops might change. Buildings rebuilt. But the heart of it stays. Places like this are anchors. He paused, then added quietly, It won't always feel like this, though. First-time magic can't be repeated. But you'll find new kinds of magic. Familiarity has its own beauty. Someday you'll walk here, knowing your favorite window, your preferred shop, being recognized by name. That's its own wonder. Draco, who'd been silent, spoke then, voice rough. I came here for my first shopping day, too. My father had, opinions, rules, expectations. I remember feeling like I was performing a part rather than living it. He looked at Scorpius' vulnerability, unguarded. Today you chose your own books. You found your own interests. You made connections. That's what I wanted for you. Freedom. Astoria's hand found Draco's. And he had it, she said. They all did. The moment held in falling snow and warm lamplight. Then, inevitably, it released. They had to move forward. Rose drew her wand, not casting anything, just lifting it like a salute. To Diagon Alley, she said softly. Thank you. Albus followed, raising his wand with careful reverence. Scorpius lifted his as well. 3 wands, 3 children, acknowledging the street that had welcomed them. The alley seemed to respond. The snowfall swirled slightly, as if drawn into a gentle spiral. Lamplight brightened for a heartbeat. Shop windows warmed as though the street itself smiled. Then it passed, subtle as breath. They lowered their wands and stepped into the courtyard. Behind them, the brick wall would seal again. Not closed forever. Never truly closed. Just waiting. Inside the leaky cauldron, the evening crowd was thick. Travelers eating, workers unwinding, families finishing a last drink before returning to ordinary life. Tom behind the bar nodded at them. Recognition without fuss. Welcome without ceremony. They moved toward the front door and the last threshold. Outside was Muggle London. Engines, exhaust, buses, street lights, the rough sound of the ordinary world. Harry paused. He took out his wand and tapped the brick wall gently, not opening it, just touching it, like a goodbye. What are you doing? Albus asked. Saying goodbye, Harry said, voice catching slightly. I always do. This place, it saved me. It gave me magic when I thought I'd never escape the Dursleys. It showed me I belonged somewhere. Every time I leave, I thank it for still being here. Albus understood more than he expected to. He stepped closer and pressed his palm to the brick. It hummed faintly under his hand. Goodbye, he whispered. Thank you. I'll come back. Then they stepped out into Muggle London, and the transition hit like cold water. The snow vanished instantly. The air smelled of petrol and damp pavement. Sirens and engines replaced the soft marketplace soundscape. The magic didn't disappear entirely. It stayed in their bags and in their hands and in their memories, but the world around them snapped back to normal. They paused on Charing Cross Road to separate. The Weasleys would apparate home. The Malfoys would use a discreet flue access point. The Potters would take the night bus back to Grimmauld Place. Before parting, the 3 children looked at each other. Their pact felt suddenly fragile in the open, ordinary world, but also more important. See you on the express, Rose said, voice firm as a promise. Platform 9 3/4, Albus replied. 11 o'clock, 1st of September. I'll be there, Scorpius said, then added quickly, I'll find you. We can sit together. If that's okay. It's perfect, Rose said decisively. We'll save you a compartment. The adults watched with their own expressions. Hermione openly delighted, Ron cautiously approving, Harry quietly moved, Ginny satisfied. Draco looked like he was trying to hold too many emotions at once. Astoria looked simply hopeful. Goodbyes followed. Handshakes. Polite words. But underneath, something warmer acknowledged. We shared this day. We did something different. The Weasleys disappeared with soft cracks that made nearby muggles glance around and then forget why they'd looked. The Malfoys slipped into a side passage and vanished into blue flame. The Potters stood alone on the pavement among people who had no idea what existed behind that shabby pub. "Ready for home?" Ginny asked. Wand raised to signal the night bus. Albus thought of Grimmauld Place, familiar rooms, familiar smells, the safety of what he'd known for 11 years. In less than a week, he'd leave it for Hogwarts and dormitories and the unknown. "Yeah," he said. "But I'm glad we came. I'm glad we did today." "Me too," Harry said, hand resting on his shoulder again. The night bus arrived with a loud bang, purple and outrageous and impossible. Muggles jumped. The bus squealed to a stop like it didn't believe in physics. They climbed aboard with bags and bundles and wedged themselves into seats while the conductor shouted cheerfully. As the bus lurched forward with its trademark violence, Albus looked back through the window. Charing Cross Road blurred into ordinary streetlights and shop fronts. To Muggle eyes, nothing had changed. But Albus knew better. He knew what waited behind that unremarkable door. A whole world. Hidden but never gone. The night bus arrived with a bang loud enough to make 3 nearby Muggles jump in perfect unison, clutching their coats and looking around as if the universe had briefly misbehaved. The bus was still purple, still violently unapologetic, still impossible in a way that made Albus's brain want to argue with it, even after a day of watching bricks melt into doorways and snow fall in September. Its doors folded open with a hiss, and warm, chaotic air rushed out. Old upholstery, damp wool, something like peppermint and brass, and the faint lingering tang of magic that clung to public transport the way rain clung to London pavements. Inside, the triple-decker interior was all narrow aisles and stacked beds that looked as if they'd been designed by someone who'd heard of comfort only second-hand. "Evening," boomed Stan Shunpike, older now, but still unmistakably Stan, hair less glossy, posture a bit looser, voice just as certain the whole world was listening. "Watch your step, mind the luggage, mind the whatnots, mind your own feet. Yes, that means you. Mate right. Anyone falling over, do it politely, yeah?" The shrunken head hanging near the windshield muttered something sharp and insulting about everyone on board, including the bus itself. Its eyes rolled dramatically, as if being forced to exist in proximity to human beings was an ongoing tragedy. Ginny stepped up first, easy as breathing, the way she always moved through the wizarding world, confident, belonging. Harry followed with the quiet readiness of someone who had survived too many sudden lurches in life to ever fully relax. Albus came last, balancing bags, trying not to smack anyone with the long parcel containing his robes, and clutching his wand box against his ribs like it was both precious and fragile, and also somehow alive. He wasn't even sure when he'd started holding it that way. At some point after Ollivanders, the box had stopped being an item and started being proof. Proof he wasn't imagining things. Proof he wasn't watching other people live a life that belonged to them while he stood on the edge. Proof that magic had reached out and chosen him specifically, not because of his father's name, but because of who he was. The bus slammed into motion with no warning whatsoever. Albus stumbled, yelped, and sat hard on the nearest seat, while his bags tried to migrate in 3 directions at once. Ginny laughed, full and bright. The kind of laugh that made even the shrunken head pause, like it had briefly forgotten it hated everyone. "Still hate this thing," Harry muttered, bracing one hand against the seat back and the other against the wall like he was riding a dragon through a hurricane. "You love it?" Ginny said. "I love that it gets us home," Harry corrected. And Albus heard the warmth underneath the complaint. Harry's complaints were often just affection wearing a sturdier coat. Outside, London became streaks of light and shape. Pavement and bus stops and wet black roads blurred into a smear of ordinary life. The sound of engines and sirens pressed against the glass like it was trying to get in, trying to reclaim them. But inside the night bus, the wizarding world still clung to them, still hummed faintly, still felt closer than it should have. Albus tried to watch out the window, but the world couldn't decide on one location for more than a second. A lamppost appeared and vanished. A row of houses flashed by like a deck of cards flicked too fast to read. A cat sat on a wall and stared directly at him as they flew past, eyes too intelligent for an ordinary animal. For one dizzy moment, Albus thought the cat winked. He swallowed hard and focused on his breathing. "All right?" Harry asked quietly, leaning closer so only Albus could hear. Albus nodded immediately, too quickly, then stopped and tried again with something closer to honesty. "I think so. It's just my head feels full." "That's normal," Ginny said, leaning over from her seat with an affectionate look. "You saw half the wizarding world in one day, bought the other half, and now you're being shaken like a bottle of butterbeer. Anyone's head would feel full." Albus gave a small laugh, and it loosened something in his chest. He looked down at his hands. His fingers were slightly smudged with ink from where he'd helped tuck the napkin packed away safely, and there was a faint, sweet smell lingering on his sleeve from Florian Fortescue's, peppermint and chocolate, and something warm underneath it, like happiness caught and held. And then, like a scene he couldn't stop replaying, he remembered the way the ice cream parlor had glowed in enchanted snowlight, the way Rose had written their pact with absolute seriousness, as if friendship deserved proper documentation, the way Scorpius had stared at his own signature like it was a small miracle he was allowed to make, the way Draco Malfoy, had looked at his son like hope was something fragile he was terrified to drop. Albus had never expected to carry any of that home with him. He had expected shopping. He had expected lists and stress, and maybe a bit of wonder. He hadn't expected connection, not the kind that slipped under the skin and stayed there. The bus lurched so hard, it felt like it temporarily forgot gravity existed. Albus's stomach tried to relocate to his throat. He made a small noise of distress that came out somewhere between a cough and a wheeze. Harry patted his shoulder with the gentle competence of someone who'd once survived Portkeys. "I feel like almost is doing a lot of work," Albus managed, which made Ginny snort. Stan shouted something about turning left where left didn't exist. The shrunken head swore loudly about the concept of roads. The bus tilted at an angle that seemed morally wrong, and then, without apology, it slammed to a stop. "Grim old place," Stan announced as if he'd delivered them to paradise. "Watch your step. Watch your bags. Watch your... Oh, don't bother. You'll all be fine. Probably." They spilled out into a quieter street, where the air was cooler, darker, more private. The city noise softened here, as if even London held its breath around this particular patch of space. The houses pressed close, old and stubborn. The street lamps flickered with steady yellow light. And then, as always, number 12 accepted them. It appeared between houses, like a secret reluctantly revealed, the building shifting into existence with that subtle wrongness that made your eyes want to slide away. The door was solid and dark and familiar. Albus's exhaustion eased slightly at the sight of it. Home. The place that was his, even if it was strange, even if it carried ghosts of older lives. Inside, the house smelled like old wallpaper and polish, and something faintly herbal that was probably a cleaning charm. The hallway seemed narrower at night. The portraits muttered as they passed, and one of them made an offended noise at the sight of bags. Creature appeared with a soft pop, face pinched, posture resentful, as if being summoned into the presence of joy was an insult. Creature does not understand why the master insists on bringing so many bags, he said immediately, voice dripping disdain. The house is not a warehouse. The house is a noble home of creature, Ginny said, tone warm but firm in a way that made him pause. They're Albus's Hogwarts things. Creature's expression shifted, still sour, but quieter around the edges, as if the word Hogwarts had old weight in it. The house itself seemed to lean in at that word, too, listening. Hogwarts, Creature muttered, and then grudgingly, Creature will take the bags. The luggage lifted itself with obedient magic, floating up the stairs in a neat line like a procession. Albus watched it go, with a strange little swell in his chest. My things, he thought, my school things. It sounded impossible, even now, but it was real. Upstairs, his room felt smaller after the day's vastness, but also safer. The quiet wrapped around him like a blanket. His bed sat patiently, ready to catch him. The window showed a slice of dark London sky, ordinary stars faint through city light. Albus unpacked slowly, not because he didn't know how, because every item felt like it deserved care. His robes came first. The fabric was soft in his hands, exactly as promised, like it had already learned the shape of him. When he held it up, it looked like what it was. A uniform, a declaration, a visible sign that he was stepping into something ancient and real. He hung them carefully, smoothing the sleeves. For a moment he just stood there, staring, letting the sight settle. Then the books. He stacked them on his desk, one by one, feeling their weight. The Standard Book of Spells, a history of magic, magical theory, and the extra one he'd chosen, magical ethics in the post-war era, the title alone making something in him sit up straighter, curious and unsettled in equal measure. He imagined Hermione writing laws, speaking in the ministry, being the kind of adult who took the world seriously, because she knew what happened when people didn't. He imagined Ron making jokes to keep the darkness from getting too close. He imagined his parents, his mother, flying like the sky, belonged to her, his father touching brick like it was a friend. Albus paused with the peace-pop firecrackers in his hands. The orange paper was bright and cheerful and faintly warm. He could almost hear George's voice. Field researchers, mildly reprimanded at worst. He set them carefully in a drawer, like they were both treasure and temptation. Then, finally, the wand. He placed the box on his bedside table and sat on the edge of his bed, as if the furniture might judge him for taking this too lightly. His fingers hesitated on the lid. Even now, even after he'd held it in Ollivanders, it felt like opening it again might make it vanish, like the wand might decide it had made a mistake. He took a breath and lifted the lid. Ashwood, dark and elegant, grain, subtle, handle-shaped so naturally it made his palm ache with recognition. He lifted it, and the weight settled into his hand like it had always been there. Albus raised it slightly, no dramatic gesture, no flourish, no practiced spell, just a small movement and a whispered certainty inside his chest. Warm light gathered at the tip, faint as firelight behind a curtain. It didn't explode. It didn't shout. It simply glowed, steady and present, like reassurance made visible. Albus swallowed hard and smiled. He couldn't help it. The door creaked open behind him. Harry stood in the doorway, half lit by the hall light, looking softer around the edges than he ever did in public. For a moment he didn't speak, just watched Albus holding the wand. "Feels right?" Harry asked quietly. Albus nodded. "Yeah. It feels like I'm not pretending?" Harry's expression shifted, something like pride and relief braided together. He stepped into the room and sat on the edge of the bed beside Albus, careful not to crowd him. "You know," Harry said after a moment, There were years when I thought the wizarding world would never feel safe again, even after the war. Even after everything was over. It took time. Places like Diagon Alley, they helped. They reminded me there was still ordinary life. Still shops. Still ice cream. Still jokes. Albus looked at his wand. It felt like it was welcoming us. It was, Ginny said from the doorway now, leaning on the frame. She changed into comfortable clothes, hair loose, eyes tired in a happy way. It always does. But first times feel louder. The magic makes more of an effort. Harry huffed a small laugh. Oh, you pay attention more? That too, Ginny agreed. Albus glanced up at them, his parents, standing there like anchors. He suddenly felt a tightness behind his eyes he didn't fully understand. It's soon, he said, voice smaller than he meant. Hogwarts. Ginny's face softened. I know. Harry's hand landed on Albus's shoulder, warm and steady. You'll be all right, he said, simple and sure, in the way only a parent could be when they were trying not to show fear. You'll mess up. You'll get lost. You'll be late to something important. You'll meet people who matter. You'll learn spells that change how you see the world. And you'll come home for Christmas and act like you've been away for a year. Ginny smiled. And you'll complain about homework like it's a personal betrayal. Albus laughed and the tightness eased. When they left, Albus lay back and stared at the ceiling, wand box safe beside him. Sleep didn't come immediately. His mind was too full. Images layered over images, like pages turning too fast. Diagon Alley in golden morning light. Flourish and Blotts, smelling like knowledge. Madame Malkin's mirror, smiling kindly. Theo Ollivander's careful hands. Rose's golden spiral of light. Scorpius's silver starlight filling the shop like a winter sky. George's grin turning gentler when he offered Scorpius a gift with no strings. The snow falling in lamplight, like blessing. The brick wall ceiling behind them, with a whisper that felt like, come back soon. Eventually, exhaustion softened the edges of thought. His breathing slowed. The room grew heavier with quiet. And somewhere in the middle of sleep, Albus dreamed of a street made of ancient stone and warm light. He dreamed of books rearranging themselves into towers and laughter blooming like fireworks. He dreamed of a train whistle. T, 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 t. He dreamed of a hat with a voice like old cloth and older magic. Back in Diagon Alley, the night deepened properly. Shopkeepers moved through closing routines that had been repeated for centuries. Locks clicked. Wards settled. Window displays dimmed to softer glows, meant to keep the street from feeling abandoned. Lanterns burned steady amber, reflecting off cobblestones and the last lingering dust of enchanted snow. Ollivanders stood dark and quiet, its front window empty now. The single display wand removed. Inside, towers of long boxes rested like sleeping creatures, each wand patient in its own way. Some waited months, some waited years, some waited generations. None of them hurried. Magic didn't hurry. Magic endured. Flourish and Blotts fell into a gentle hush. Floating candles drifted lower, their light warmer. Books whispered to each other. Pages rustling like soft voices. Spines shifting minutely, as if the shop itself was settling into a comfortable position for the night. Somewhere in the back, a tome thumped itself shut, with the decisive air of someone finished with the day. The apothecary sealed its rare ingredients behind glass and warding. Afua wiped her counter with a cloth that smelled faintly of mint and smoke, then paused to look out the window at the alley. Her shop had welcomed another set of first years today. Another set of hands learning what it meant to hold a bezoar, to trust your nose, to respect danger without fearing knowledge. She smiled to herself and turned out the lights. Quality Quidditch Supplies locked its doors and tucked the Firebolt X away like a jewel returned to its case. The broom had spun all day, admired by dozens, dreamed about by hundreds. Tomorrow, it would spin again. The cycle continued. Weasley's wizard wheezes remained louder than any shop had the right to be, even after closing. Its window displays kept moving, because laughter didn't like to be told to go to bed. George Weasley wandered the aisles alone for a while after customers left, straightening boxes, checking charms, making notes about what had sold well, what needed improvement, what Fred would have teased him about. His eyes drifted once to the painted portrait of his twin, laughing forever. George's mouth quirked. "Good day," he murmured softly, and if anyone had asked who he was talking to, he would have made a joke. But there was no one to ask. Only the shop, humming with warm, stubborn joy. Florian Fortescue's ice cream parlor washed its dishes and wiped down its tables until they shone. The wall of signatures waited in quiet pride, names drying into permanence. Rose Granger Weasley, Albus Potter, Scorpius Malfoy. 3 names, 1 date, 1 day that would never exist again except in memory. Outside, the magical snow-thinned flakes dissolving into air like the last notes of a song. Its work was done, softening the world, making it feel like a storybook for those who needed that gentleness on a threshold day. The alley itself seemed to breathe satisfied. 3 more children had been welcomed. 3 more wands had found hands. 3 more stories had nudged into motion. Because that was the thing about Diagon Alley. It wasn't just a street. It was an anchor. A passage. A witness. It had watched generations arrive with crumpled lists and tight throats and bright eyes. It had seen war and recovery, grief and rebuilding. Old grudges handed down like heirlooms, and new choices made like spells cast in quiet defiance. It remembered. It always remembered. Above the rooftops, stars gathered, more visible here than they had any right to be in the middle of London. The alley made its own rules when it felt like it, bending the ordinary just enough to let wonder slip through. Orion settled into place. Cassiopeia hung like a crown. A dragon-shaped curve of starlight coiled across the north, as if the sky itself had decided to keep watch. Somewhere across the city, 3 wand boxes sat on bedside tables. 3 sets of robes hung waiting. A napkin with 3 signatures rested folded inside a book or tucked into a pocket, absurd and precious and exactly the kind of thing that became important later. And Diagon Alley waited. Not closed, not gone, not finished. Waiting for tomorrow's customers. Waiting for the next child to gasp at the impossible. Waiting for Christmas, when familiar steps would return, and the magic would feel different, less like thunder, more like hearthfire. Waiting for the cycle to continue. Because magic never ended. It only changed hands.